Let's have a brief overview of the Xamarin Designer for iOS Storyboards. Open up Xamarin and your project, open main.storyboard, and your storyboard should show. Now, as a general concept, storyboards represent kind of scenes inside your app. The idea is taken from the sort of cartoon world where you would make storyboards as you progress through time along your story. Storyboards inside of apps represent screens as they are going to appear to the user. There's a bit more functionality in them. You can have transitions from scene to scene within a storyboard. But as a general concept, think of them as a kind of comic that tells you what's going to happen and how your app is going to flow. Before storyboards came along, we had to code everything by hand, which was a bit painful, but now that we have them, it's far easier to pop things into our app. Inside of our current storyboard, we can click this zoom icon to fit everything to our screen. We can zoom in and out using the icons next to that. At the moment, we have one item called a view controller. And if you remember previously, I told you that a view controller is effectively a scene inside of your app. We have an entry point for our app, which is over on the left-hand side. And if I click view controller, I can scroll down in my properties pane, and we have this item here that says is initial view controller. You can click that on and off to set the initial controller. I believe if you only have one controller, it will always be the initial one, but don't take my word for it. Okay, so we have our view controller. How do we drag objects into there, or graphical elements? Over in our toolbox at the top right corner, we can scroll down and grab elements. So if I grab something like an activity indicator view, I can click and drag it and drop it in to my view controller. And I'm just going to zoom in so we can all see it a little more clearly. Now if I clicked this activity indicator and I head over to my properties section, I can set different items about it. I can also set things like identifiers and names for it. So right at the top we have a name. Let's call this activity indicator. Now, if you're coming from the iOS world in Xcode, you'll recognize the two words called outlets and actions. Outlets and actions, if you're not familiar, were where you would drag from a graphical element into your code file to create a kind of connection between the GUI and the code. Xamarin is a little bit different to that. In fact, I think it is somewhat better than how Apple does it in Xcode. Once you've named something in the identity section, click the viewcontroller.cs, expand it, and open up the designer.cs file behind it. Inside of here, you'll notice that an outlet is automatically generated by the iOS designer for our activity indicator. So if I double click the view controller, inside my view did load, I can start to reference this activity indicator and it gets automatically filled for us. This is a lot simpler than the Xcode version. So that is the basics of the storyboard section. It's the basics of how we drag controls in and how those controls, buttons, labels and things are identified by the code behind our file.